He gave her a gift no one else would, and the alien woman couldn't hold back the tears. Across the void, the terraformed gardens of Nexus 7 Outpost were Tyrus Everett's only sanctuary amidst the perpetual diplomatic tensions. His fingers worked delicately among the hybrid plants he'd cultivated, part Earth species and part alien flora, much like this outpost itself, existing in the uncertain space between human and Zevran territories. Another late cycle in the gardens, Dr. Everett, came the station commander's voice over the comm system. The Zevran delegation arrives in 3 hours. Ambassador Reeves has requested your presence at the welcoming ceremony. Tyrus sighed, carefully setting aside the luminescent blue seed pods he'd been cataloging. Understood, Commander. I'll be prepared. At 34, Tyrus hadn't planned on becoming an accidental diplomat. His research into adaptive botanical species had simply made him valuable on this frontier outpost, where getting either species to literally break bread together required foods that wouldn't poison the other. The Zevran, with their copper-based biochemistry, couldn't digest most human foods, and vice versa. After washing the soil from his hands, Tyrus changed into his formal Science Division uniform, charcoal gray with blue trim that matched his eyes. He'd been told his tall, lean frame and habitually serious expression made him appear properly respectful to the Zevran, which was why Ambassador Reeves insisted on his presence at these functions despite his protests. The station's diplomatic hall had been transformed for the occasion. The temperature dropped several degrees to accommodate Zevran preference, and the lighting shifted to the amber spectrum that better suited their sensitive eyes. The human delegation stood in rigid formation as the airlock doors parted. The Zevran moved with fluid precision, their silvery-scaled skin catching the light in rippling patterns. Their height, most stood over 2 meters tall, made them naturally imposing to humans. They wore ceremonial armor in shades of deep crimson and obsidian, the metal alloys unfamiliar to Earth metallurgists. At their front walked Ambassador Kavath, flanked by 4 Zevran guards, but it was the guard to his immediate right that caught Tyrus's attention. Unlike the others with their pale silver skin, hers had a faint blue undertone. Her crest, the ridge of semi-flexible cartilage that ran from forehead to the base of the skull on all Zevran, was adorned with intricate patterns that marked her rank. Guardian of the 3rd Circle Naren K. Sarah, the protocol officer announced as the delegation was formally presented. When her gold-flecked eyes swept over the human delegation, they paused momentarily on Tyrus. He felt a strange chill, not of fear but recognition of something kindred. She was a soldier in a room of politicians, just as he was a scientist. Neither of them belonged, yet both were necessary. The following days fell into a familiar pattern of tense negotiations. The Crimson Nebula conflict had left both species wary, though the peace had held for 3 standard years now. Tyrus attended meetings when botanical or environmental matters arose, but otherwise retreated to his gardens. On the 5th evening, while working late among his specimens, he sensed a presence. Guardian Naren stood at the entrance to the garden dome, her posture rigid but her eyes curious. "These are not merely decorative," she said, her voice carrying the distinctive harmonic undertone of all Zevran speech. It wasn't a question. Tyrus straightened, careful to make no sudden movements. "No, they're hybrids I've been developing, plants that can thrive in both human and Zevran environments." He gestured to a particular specimen. "This one, for instance, produces proteins digestible by both our species." She approached with a warrior's careful grace. "You create new life forms to bridge our differences." "I suppose that's one way to look at it." Her head tilted slightly, a Zevran expression of interest. "Our botanists believe species should remain pure to their evolutionary purpose." "And yet," Tyrus said, gesturing to the viewport where stars glittered against the blackness of space, "nature itself constantly experiments. Every nebula births new elements, Every solar flare changes the chemistry of worlds. Something in her posture relaxed fractionally. You speak like a Zevran philosopher. Is that a compliment? An observation? But there was a lilting quality to her harmonic undertone that suggested amusement. In the days that followed, Naren returned to the gardens during her off-duty cycles. At first, she observed silently as Tyrus worked. Gradually, she began asking questions about Earth flora and the adaptations he was creating. Tyrus, starved for scientific conversation, found himself looking forward to her visits. He learned that Zevran could go 3 days without sleep, that their society was organized into circles rather than nations, and that Naren had trained since childhood for her role as guardian. "You never chose your path," he asked once, carefully transplanting a seedling. "Choice is a human preoccupation," she replied. "Function and suitability determine one's place in Zevran society. And are you suitable as a guardian?" Her crest flattened slightly, a sign of discomfort he'd learned. "I serve with honor." 2 weeks into the diplomatic mission, Tyrus couldn't sleep. The negotiations had grown tense over resource rights in the Talaris sector. He wandered to the observatory deck, seeking solace in the stars, only to find Naren already there. She stood motionless before the vast viewport, her reflection ghostly against the backdrop of stars. The third moon of Nexus 7 hung luminous in the void, bathing the deck in pale light. "I apologize," Tyrus said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You are not intruding." She didn't turn from the stars. "This is when Malkir's comet would be visible from my homeworld." Tyrus moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain proper distance. "A significant astronomical event for your people." "For my family, once." Her voice carried a new tone he hadn't heard before. "My brother Talrin and I would watch for it every 16 cycles." Tyrus remained silent, sensing the rarity of this personal revelation. "He died in the Battle of the Crimson Nebula," she continued after a long pause. "His ship was destroyed by human forces." "I'm sorry," Tyrus said, the words inadequate but sincere. "Zevran do not mourn as humans do," she said, her voice firming. "Upon entering the Guardian circles, we undergo the severance. All familial bonds are ceremonially broken. Attachments are weakness. Memory is distraction." "That sounds difficult." "It is our way." But her eyes remained fixed on the stars where the comet would be. "Guardian K. Sarah has no brother. Guardian K. Sarah has no memories. There is only duty. Yet you're here, watching for a comet you shared with him." For the first time, she turned to look at him directly. In the moonlight, the blue undertones of her skin were more pronounced, and something vulnerable flickered in her golden eyes. "An imperfection in my severance, perhaps." Her voice lowered. "Sometimes I think the stars remember what we are forbidden to." Later, alone in his quarters, Tyrus couldn't forget the look in her eyes. Among his people, grief was honored, memories cherished. The thought of Naren forced to erase her brother from her heart struck him as a cruelty worse than death itself. The next morning, he requested access to the station's archived data on Zevran botany, specifically, plants from Naren's home region. An idea had taken root in his mind, something that might bridge their two worlds in a way politics never could. As the diplomatic mission entered its final week, tensions escalated. The human delegation refused concessions on mining rights, while the Zevran were immovable on territorial boundaries. The possibility of the delegations departing without a renewed peace treaty loomed ominously. Tyrus worked through 3 sleep cycles on his project, combining his knowledge of Zevran biochemistry with his hybrid techniques. What emerged was unlike anything he'd created before, beautiful, but more importantly, meaningful. On the night before the Zevran departure, with negotiations at an impasse, Tyrus sought out Naren. He found her in the observatory again, her profile sharp against the stars. "Guardian K. Sarah," he said formally, Might I have a moment of your time?" She turned, her expression unreadable. "Dr. Everett, you should be at the closing reception." "So should you," he countered with a small smile. "I have something for you, something I created." Her crest lifted slightly in surprise. "A gift? Zevran guardians do not accept personal possessions." "Consider it a diplomatic exchange, then." He held out a small container, a token of hope that our peoples might yet find common ground. With hesitant movements, she accepted the container. When she opened it, her eyes widened and her breathing audibly changed. Inside was a living botanical sculpture, no larger than her palm. At its center grew a tiny cluster of rare Zevran starfire blossoms, flowers that grew only on her homeworld, in the very region she had once called home, surrounded by protective earth species that would keep them nourished. The flowers glowed with a soft blue bioluminescence, forming a pattern that subtly echoed the constellation where Malkyr's comet would now be traveling. "How did you?" Her voice held a tremor he'd never heard before. "The station archives had records of your world's flora. I've been working with hybrid techniques that allow incompatible species to support each other." He swallowed nervously. "The starfire blossoms. They're from the same region as your family name." Her fingers hovered over the tiny glowing flowers, not quite touching them. "This is forbidden," she whispered, but made no move to return the gift. "The stars remember," Tyra said softly, echoing her words from nights before. "Perhaps we should too." "What stars remember?" The Nexus 7 station hummed with tension as diplomats from both species retreated to their quarters following another failed negotiation session. 2 days remained before the Zevran delegation would depart, and without an agreement, 3 years of fragile peace hung in the balance. Naren held the botanical sculpture in her quarters, safely hidden from the eyes of her fellow guardians. Against all Zevran protocol, against the teachings of the Severance, against her sworn duty, she had kept Tyrus's gift. The tiny starfire blossoms pulsed with gentle bioluminescence that reminded her of home skis she had not seen in 7 cycles. More dangerous still, they awakened memories of Talrin, his laugh during their comet-watching nights, the way he'd taught her to navigate by stellar positions, his final embrace before departing for the mission from which he never returned. A soft chime at her door startled her from reverie. Quickly, she concealed the forbidden gift beneath a panel in her armor case and composed herself. "Enter," she commanded, expecting another guardian with schedule updates. Instead, Tyra stood in the doorway, his tall frame tense with urgency. "Guardian K. Sarah, forgive the intrusion. Ambassador Reeves requests your presence immediately. There's been a development." Something in his tone alerted her. This was no ordinary diplomatic summons. "What has occurred?" she asked as they strode through the station's corridors. "A transmission from the Talaris sector," he said quietly. "A Zevran patrol vessel and a human scientific outpost have exchanged fire. No casualties yet, but both sides claim the other fired first." Naren's posture stiffened. "This will collapse the negotiations. Unless we can prevent it." She glanced sharply at him. We are not diplomats, Dr. Everett." "No," he agreed, "which gives us an advantage. They expect to follow their scripts. We might find a different approach." The conference room was chaos when they arrived. Ambassador Kavath's crest was fully extended in the Zevran display of aggressive dominance, while Ambassador Reeves's face had flushed an angry red. Accusations flew between translation devices. "Your military vessels trespassed into established human research territory," Reeves shouted. "Your research outpost is armed with pulse cannons," Kavath responded, his harmonic undertones buzzing with barely restrained fury. "A clear violation of boundary protocols." Tyrus caught Naren's eye across the room. In that moment of connection, understanding passed between them. The politicians would never resolve this. They were too invested in posturing, in not losing face before their governments. Ambassador Vath, Naren spoke suddenly, breaking protocol by addressing her superior without being acknowledged first. Request permission to access the patrol vessel's sensor logs directly. All eyes turned to her. Vath's crest flattened slightly in surprise. For what purpose, Guardian? To verify the weapon signature. Each species' energy weapons creates distinctive radiation patterns. If human weapons were fired first, our sensors would have recorded the specific plasma decay rate. Ambassador Reeves straightened. Our outpost would maintain similar logs. Dr. Everett has expertise in radiation analysis from his botanical research. I do, Tyrus confirmed. Plant mutations are highly sensitive to different radiation signatures. I've developed detection protocols that could verify the timeline independently. 4 tense hours later, they had their answer. Tyrus and Naren presented their findings jointly before both delegations. Neither side fired first, Tyrus explained, displaying the sensor data. The energy discharges came from a third source, specifically from independent mercenary vessels known to operate in the sector. They appear to have deliberately staged the incident to provoke conflict, Naren continued. The weapon signatures match those used by the Scora Collective, a mercenary group known to profit from resource access during conflicts. The revelation changed everything. Suddenly facing a common threat, the human and Zevran delegations found new motivation to cooperate. Negotiations resumed with unprecedented progress, focusing on joint security measures against third-party provocations. As the diplomatic teams worked through the night, Tyrus and Naren found themselves alone in the station's arboretum, the crisis temporarily averted. You risked much by speaking out of turn, Tyrus observed, watching her in the dim light among his plants. As did you by suggesting a solution outside diplomatic channels. Her golden eyes met his. Why? Tyrus carefully tended to a delicate specimen before answering. The same reason I created your gift, I suppose. Some things matter more than protocols. Such as understanding, connection. He hesitated, truth. Naren moved closer, studying him with the same intensity she brought to everything. Humans place great importance on individual relationships, on feelings. We do, he admitted, don't Zevran. We are taught that emotions cloud judgment, that attachment leads to weakness. Her voice softened. Yet I find myself, attached to your gift, to the memories it allows me, to the pain and joy both. And is that weakness? I am unsure. Her crest shifted in the Zevran expression of contemplation. Tonight, my judgment led to a potential resolution when protocol would have failed. Perhaps there is strength in remembering who we are beyond our duties. Their conversation was interrupted by a station-wide announcement. The diplomatic teams had reached a provisional agreement. The crisis had passed, for now. On the final evening before the Zevran departure, an unprecedented joint celebration was held. The successful navigation of the crisis had created a cautious optimism among both delegations. Tyrus found himself continuously searching the room for Naren, but she was nowhere to be seen. After an hour of diplomatic small talk, he slipped away to the observatory deck, their unspoken meeting place. Sure enough, she stood before the stars, but something was different. Her ceremonial armor was gone, replaced by the simpler garb Zevran wore in private settings. I hoped you would find me here, she said without turning. Are you all right? You missed the celebration. I have submitted my resignation from the Guardian Circle, she said quietly. Tyrus stared in shock. Why would you? The severance requires perfect dedication, without attachment or memory. She finally turned to him. I can no longer claim such purity of purpose. Your gift awakened what should have remained dormant. I never intended to disrupt your life, he said, distressed. If I had known. You misunderstand, she interrupted, a hint of her harmonic undertone carrying what he now recognized as warmth. I do not regret it. From within her simple garments, she withdrew the botanical sculpture. The starfire blossoms had grown stronger, their light more vibrant. When I return to my homeworld, I will face judgment for this decision. I may be outcast from my circle, perhaps from Zevran society entirely. Her gaze was steady. But I will remember my brother. I will honor who I am completely. Tyrus felt his throat tighten with emotion. What will you do? There is a role for those like me, those who understand both worlds. The diplomatic corps employs cultural interpreters who work outside the Guardian structures. She hesitated, then added, such positions sometimes require extended stays on human outposts. Hope flickered in Tyrus's chest, like Nexus 7. Perhaps, if there were reason to request such an assignment. Tyrus took a careful step closer. Among her people, physical contact was reserved for those with deep, formal bonds. He respected that distance, but allowed his feelings to show plainly on his face. I believe I could provide several compelling scientific reasons for ongoing Zevran consultation in my botanical research. The scales around her eyes crinkled in the subtle Zevran expression of pleasure. I would be interested in reviewing such proposals, Dr. Everett. Tyrus, he corrected gently, if we're to be colleagues. Tyrus, she repeated, her voice carrying harmonics that translated no emotion he could name, yet somehow conveyed everything that mattered. Above them, the viewport suddenly blazed with light as Nexus 7 emerged from the shadow of its planet. The primary star's radiance illuminated them both, human and Zevran, botanist and warrior, standing together in the space between their worlds. Naren lifted the botanical sculpture so that the starlight filtered through it, causing the starfire blossoms to flare brilliantly in response. Among my people, there is an ancient poem rarely recited since the severance became our way. It speaks of distant ancestors who believed that stars are the memories of the universe, that everything that happens, every life, every moment of connection, is preserved in their light. She carefully extended her hand, holding the sculpture between them. After a moment's hesitation, Tyrus placed his hand beneath hers, supporting the delicate creation together. When I first received your gift, I wept for the first time since my brother's death, she admitted. I believed I was showing weakness. Now I understand it was strength, the strength to remember, to feel, to connect beyond boundaries. Where I come from, Tyrus said softly, we have a saying, some stars may die but their light travels forever. In the soft glow of starlight and bioluminescent flowers, their fingers intertwined around the living sculpture. Their created world, small but resilient, bridging differences that once seemed insurmountable. 3 months later, Nexus 7 welcomed its first permanent Zevran cultural liaison. The station's gardens expanded to include an entire section dedicated to hybrid botanical research. And each night during the third moon cycle, 2 figures could be seen in the observatory, watching the stars and remembering together. In the vastness of space, where ancient conflicts had once threatened to tear civilizations apart, a botanist and a former guardian created something new, a place where memory was not weakness but foundation, where differences strengthened rather than divided, and where the light of understanding continued to grow against the darkness. The universe, like the tiny starfire blossoms that now flourished throughout the station, remembered what politicians and warriors sometimes forgot, that across the greatest voids, connection remains possible, and in that connection lies the seeds of peace.